Hello YouTube. I figured I'd make a short video on how to do struts on a Gen 1 Ford Flex 2009 to 2012 model years. Now a few quick pointers, or a few quick things I should say. Ford no longer manufactures the actual struts that were used on the 2010 or that were used on the EcoBoost Flexes. The struts they recommend now are the same ones that are used on the NA version of the Flex. So in my case, since the EcoBoost, like I have here, sits lower than the NA version, if I got the Motorcraft struts, they wouldn't be the correct ones for this model year. So KYB XLG on Rock Auto, they're 71 bucks a piece. They have a direct replacement, but with that direct replacement, they also come with no spring and no upper mount bushing either. Monroe does make a quick strut for these, but the strut that they use is more geared towards the NA version, not the EcoBoost version. So if you want to maintain your ride height with EcoBoost, if you have that version of the Flex, you're gonna have to get the KYB XLG struts. And I also got new struts, new springs, and I got a new upper bushing as well. I did not get new dust boots or the joist bumper. They are not serviceable. You cannot go to Ford and order new ones, so I had to reuse mine. Now, getting this strut out of this area is where the real pain in the ass comes in. Because Gen 1 uses a pinch bolt design, you cannot lower this entire knuckle or rotor assembly low enough to get clearance to pull this strut out. So to make it easy on myself, what I did was I also got new control arms. And to remove my struts, I left the strut hanging. I unzapped this nut right here. I unzapped this nut right here for the strut to knuckle bolt. And then I loosened this bolt while it was also, tires were still on it. I loosened this bolt. And I loosened the outer tie rod nut. And all the way in the back, there's two bolts back there. And all the way up here, there's one bolt right there. Those are the nuts that I had loosened up and removed. With this CV nut removed, and these bolts back here, and the one up here, that guy, with that removed, I was able to take this whole unit, and I have some play in this. I had some play in this whole unit. I then went up top and loosened the 4 bolts up at the top to give play in the whole strut assembly, which then gave me enough play to where I could pull this whole knuckle, the knuckle and the control arm, because I pulled the control arm out of the frame and it just fell. I was able to pull all of that out and away, which then made this whole knuckle area just fall straight down. Now, doing that, you want to make sure that you don't overextend this CV axle, because if you do that, you're going to pull this out and then you're really going to be in a world of hurt and create more work for yourself. So pulling this knuckle off is, just take caution when you do that. There should be play in it. I had to get a little hammer and tap right here to knock it through. Then once I did all that, this knuckle fell straight down and I pulled it away. And from there, it was easy to unbolt the remaining 4 nuts up here at the top, and this just dropped out. Now when you do this, Ford recommends or states in the manual that you replace any bolts and nuts that you actually remove. Since I replaced the control arm, which I got from Tosca Auto Parts, and an actual Motorcraft bushing, I went and had this pressed on separately. I got new nuts for the back. I couldn't get the bolts. I got a new bolt up front, new stabilizer link nut, new bolt and a new nut for the pinch, and a new outer tie rod nut, as well as, if you can see it, a new lower ball joint nut. You're gonna spend, I spent a little over $70 just in nuts and bolts to do this for both sides. And I will put the part numbers in the description of, I don't remember the part numbers for these bolts specifically, but I will put part numbers for the struts, the springs, if you go to Tosca, the springs, there's a spring with a turbo and a spring without turbo and a spring, actually let me rephrase that. It's a spring without all-wheel drive and without turbo, and there's a spring with all-wheel drive and with a turbo. And I got the one with all-wheel drive and turbo because I have a Turbo Flex. Putting this back together, removing this lower control arm and this lower ball joint with the knuckle away from the strut and out of the car is so much easier. This knuckle is a 15/16 nut. It might help if I have light, huh? It's a 15/16 nut, and what's on top, what you're supposed to hold, is an 11mm bolt. It gets torqued to 148 foot-pounds. It is easier to do this out of the vehicle. Now, putting it back in the vehicle, I put this part right here on a jack, and I use the jack to hold the weight. I then put my new assembled strut in and tied it up at the top with hand tight with the 4 nuts up there, so it's just dangling there. And then I carefully put the rear of the lower control arm into this little housing back here. I carefully put that back there. Carefully, I put it in there. I then use the jack with this right here on the jack. I then use the jack to lift this whole assembly up in. I use the jack to lift the whole assembly. Lift this whole assembly up through the strut. Once it was up there, I put this bolt through and I hand tightened it so it would hold it. And then I used the jack to push this bushing up carefully so that it would seat back in its little area that sits back there. And then I'd use the same jack to do the front. Once you get it all aligned, you torque everything down. And I don't remember the torques off the top of my head to do this, but I'll have all those in the description. These bolts, I don't know if it was these ones or the front lower forward control arm bolt, but one of them is $17. They're pretty expensive. When you go to remove this stuff, it would help if you probably heat these bolts up. See this nylon locking? That's the original. This is a new nut. So this nylon locking, I've read that if you melt this, it makes taking these bolts off so much easier. This one has one. This one has one, as does the lower control arm. If I can get to it, it's got one too. So before you remove, you might help to melt those off. Then once it's reassembled, you just put everything back together and make sure you're all back down the torque spec. I do want to note this torque bolt right here, the torque spec is 136 foot-pounds if I remember correctly, and you're supposed to torque it down with the vehicle on its tires on the ground. So the vehicle has to be supporting its own weight. These little bolts back here, I believe, were 73 foot-pounds. And I believe this is 111, the lower control arm, or the lower ball joint. That's 148. I think this was 140, and I'm not sure what this one was. I'll put all those in the description. If you're getting new springs, you're going to need a spring compression or a spring compression kit. I rented mine from O'Reilly. It was pretty cheap to put that on there. When you get to the struts, in here, that bolt down there, once you remove the strut out, the bolt is a 7/8 bolt. Very few places make an off-center wrench that is 7/8. So I went to Summit Racing. They have a strut removal kit. It comes with this and a few other things. Actually, this is the wrong one. I'm an idiot. This is what they came with. And you use this part that goes down over, this part goes down inside the strut over the actual nut. And then this part's open that you can put your socket on. I believe this is also an 11mm socket. These top nuts down inside get torqued down to 98 foot-pounds. This is the original one. I had to reuse this one, so I put thread locker on it. And you can get new ones from Ford to make it easier, because you're supposed to replace them. So, well, that's all I have when you're doing these. If you're not replacing the control arm at all and you only want to do the struts, You still have to remove the CV axle joint, or the CV axle out of the hub, just so the hub can go low enough to potentially get this strut out, but it's still going to be fighting you the whole damn way. And you want to be careful that you don't ruin your bushings in the back, because this whole arm's going to twist and you're going to twist that whole bushing. And then now for the look, these are the original struts that came out. This my Flex has 122,000 miles on it. And if you look, when I compress this strut in, or this, yeah, it comes out but very slowly. This was the driver. This guy's the passenger. And when I push him in, he comes out real slow too. So it was time to replace them. These are the original control arms. My ball joints were still good, but I replaced the control arm anyway, just in case. You can see this, the bushing right here, it's all cracked. You might not be able to see it very well down inside there. I might have to get a flashlight to show you. So let's get a flashlight real quick. So here we are. As you can see, this flashlight is absolutely junk. It's not helping me at all. But as you look, the bottom of this bushing, you may not be able to see it on camera, but there's a lot of cracks right here. So when the wheels would turn, this would freely float and it could throw your toe off. So that's why I had to replace all my stuff. The upper bushings, they're the same for both sides, as are the springs. These are original, as you can tell. There's some vertical play in them. There's a lot of play, actually. I don't know if you can see it on camera. I'm not a big YouTuber, so I don't have like all the greatest stuff here. So I might be able to, so you can see all the play that has in it. The springs I went ahead and replaced. I don't think you have to probably replace them. You can probably save them. I got mine from Tosca, so they weren't really that expensive. They kind of sit crooked. Oops, how about I do this way? They kind of sit like off to the, they kind of sit off center, but when you get up, when you get together, they sit just fine. And I figured I'd replace mine because these are probably old anyway. Well, they are old, they're 7 years old, so. And that's all the tips that I have. If you're wondering, these are Stop Tech rotors with Stop Tech pads. Oh, the ABS sensor. The tone ring for these is on the actual hub itself. Excuse me. And it sits right here. Right here. And then if you look behind, you're not going to be able to see inside here, but in here there's a gap where the actual tone ring sits. It's magnetic, so don't have to worry about losing that. Outside of that, if you reuse your strut tower, your stabilizer links like I did, this is an 11mm nut, or this is 11mm bolt. This is a 13/16 nut. This is also an 11mm focus here, 11mm bolt, and this is a 13/16 nut as well. This is also 13/16. The other side is actually held on by this flange. This is called a stretch bolt, so you have to replace it if you remove it, unless you Loctite it and put it down there pretty tight. So with that, that's all that I have. Thank you.